Okay, so we probably should do some summaries. So here's my question, which maybe we should have asked before we started recording, but do we want to do like a summary of both the chapters together and then talk about both the chapters together, or do them separately?
Ooh, that is a great question. Anyone have a preference? 6th and 7, or all in one?
I think we should do them separately.
Deal.
Okay. Cool.
Thanks for being decisive.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Miss Watson, do you want to summarize chapter 6?
Great. Yes, I would love to summarize chapter 6. Okay, chapter 6 is called Beast from Air. So this was a little confusing. I know for myself, it was like after multiple goes through of reading this book, I kind of finally figured it out because you have to read pretty carefully. So at the beginning, it's nighttime on the island, and they describe a battle going on over their heads, like in the air. So it's a war. Like, I still am convinced it's World War II. And it says, a sign came down from the world of grown-ups, though at the time there's no child awake to read it. So if you remember from last chapter, Ralph was hoping for a sign, and they got their sign, but nobody was awake to notice what was going on in the sky, and there are no sounds. So what happened was there's these plane battles, and a guy with a parachute, a dead guy, falls from one of these planes, or I guess parachutes from one of these planes, but he's dead. Lands on the island. The wind catches his parachute and kind of drags him up the mountain. So he ends up at the top of the mountain, and he gets all tangled up with the parachute strings. So he describes him like his head is down in between his knees, and then the wind blows and it pulls the parachute back. And he kind of sits up with the parachute around him. And then when the wind dies down, his head goes back down. So it looks like he's kind of rising and falling. And Sam and Eric are up at the top of the mountain, and they are trying to guard the fire and keep it going. And they see this, and
I think it's the beast.
Yes, they think it's the beast. They're convinced. And I'm kind of picturing when the parachute goes up, almost like wings, like a dragon, like his arms are attached to it. So I'm picturing like a dragon kind of thing. So so Sam and Eric see it. They're like convinced it's a beast, and they run down the mountain to tell the rest of the boys. Now, this is interesting to me because as a reader, we now know for sure that the beast isn't real, right? Because we know that it's this dead parachuter, but the boys are now more convinced than ever that it is real. So they run down, they tell them about this beast. They're like, it has teeth and claws, and it tried to chase after us. And so they're scared, and then they decide that they have to go find it and investigate. And they are trying to figure out, and Ralph, of course, is going off about how we have to relight the fire, as he does. And then so they're going off to find it, but they're trying to decide where to go, and they're like, well, where should we look? And Jack says there's only one part of the island that we haven't been. There's like at the tail end of the island, there's this like rocky kind of outcropping, and you have to cross this tall, I pictured like this tall, like bridgey thing of rocks to get there. So they haven't gone there because it's kind of dangerous. But they figure it's the only place they haven't been, so that's where the beast must be. So they go there. Some of the big kids, they leave Piggy behind to watch the little ones. And they are, so they get there, and they cross, it's kind of like this day, like who's going to go first, right? Cross this thing. So Ralph and they go over to this thing, and they think it's a cool place. A lot of them think it's like a cool place for a fort. And they are like rolling rocks off of it into the water. They're like having a grand old time. And Ralph's like, you guys are crazy. Like, do you not realize that we are literally like stranded on an island? Our fire's out. There's probably a beast out there. Like, what are you thinking? like, he's like, there's no they're like, we should just hang out here. They're like, there's no water here, there's no food here, our signal fire's gone out, like, what are you guys doing? Like, he's totally driven insane. Like, he's just like, you guys are crazy. Am I crazy? Like, why am I the only one that cares about this? So he's like, we need to go relight the fire. So finally he's like, I'm in charge, we're going. And that's how the chapter ends, is like, they're like, okay, fine, we'll leave this cool, Castle Rock, they call it. So that's how that chapter ends.
Sweet summary, Miss Watson.
Thanks.
I feel like Ralph is kind of going crazy right now. It's like, why don't you guys understand? Why are you wanting to build a fort right now? Mm-hmm. Don't you want to be rescued? I think you did a good job describing that. And I think it's interesting because as they're marching off to this new section of unexplored terrain on the island, Simon is just kind of like, this seems nuts.
Yeah.
Like, there's a beast that we can't track that lives at the top of the mountain. What? Like, there.
Yeah, the quote's on page 104. I put a little star next to it. It says, Simon, while walking in front of Ralph, felt a flicker of incredulity. I can't, sorry.
Yes, I marked the same quote, but it's on 103 in this book, in case you were trying to read along.
A beast with claws that scratched, that sat on a mountaintop, that left no tracks, and yet was not fast enough to catch Sam and Eric. However Simon thought of the beast, there rose before his inward sight the picture of a human at once heroic and sick. So he's like, this is just us. Like he's been saying all along. Like, the beast doesn't exist. Like, this is all in our heads.
Yeah, I marked the same quote for the same reason. And later in the chapter, I think it is, or even maybe in chapter 7, Simon later says, I don't believe in the beast.
Yeah, he says it right in like 2 pages later.
Yeah. Sorry for the extra noise. There's cooking going on in my office.
Mm.
And I also marked a page on 106, and it's about this unexplored part of the island. Just because one of the assignments from this week was to notice imagery, and I feel like the whole image of the island is going into this really kind of creepy place, especially the way they describe this new part of the island.
I'm curious if it's the same one that I picked.
Oh, I wonder if we're matching. This is on 106. It says, nothing but what you might expect. Pink tumbled boulders with guano layered on them like icing, and a steep slope to the shattered rocks that crowned the bastion. A sound behind him made him turn. Jack was edging along on the ledge. Couldn't let you do it on your own. And, later on it said, sorry, I'm off. He said he led the way over the rocks, inspected a sort of half cave that held nothing more terrible than a clutch of rotten eggs, and at last sat down, looking round him and tapping the rock with the butt of his spear. Jack was excited. What a place for a fort! A column of spray wetted them. No fresh water. What's that, then? There was indeed a long green smudge halfway up the rock. They climbed up and tasted the trickle of water. You could keep a coconut shell there, filling all the time. Not me. This is a rotten place. So I think Jack sees it as this awesome place to build a fort, and Ralph is like, no. Lots of dead things here. Lots of sharp rocks. Not into it.
I picked something different, but at the top of the page it says, they're describing it. It says, then the sleeping Leviathan breathed out, the waters rose, the weed streamed, and the water boiled over the table rock with a roar. There was no sense of the passage of waves, only this minute-long fall and rise and fall. So I just thought that the words that they use there are different than how were describing things at the beginning of the book. Like, the word Leviathan is like this giant kind of scary thing. And the water boiled over, like, just the use of those words to me has a different impact than, like, at the beginning when they describe the, like, beautiful clear waters and the pink rocks and the sand, and, like, so I just felt like it was a good contrast of, like, how they're describing things.
they've gone from an all expenses paid cruise to some scary deserted island.
And then the other thing I think, I mentioned this at the beginning before we started recording, but the friendship part is like coming back. So like when they were talking about where they're going to hunt, Jack answers, he says, there's only one, but of course you remember. And then like he's talking to Ralph. And then later it talks about, it says side by side, they scaled the last height. This is on page 108. I think it must be a different page, 107 in that one. They scaled the last height to where the diminishing pile was crowned by the last broken rock. Drax struck the near one with his fist and it grated slightly. Do you remember? Consciousness of the bad times in between came to them both. Jack talked quickly. So like they're remembering that very first day when they're there, when Jack, Ralph, and Simon go to explore the island, and they just had so much fun. But then it says the consciousness of the bad times came to them both. So like there was this remembrance of when they were friends, when everything was good, and then they started to remember how bad it has been, and I think they both feel bad about that. So like there are these moments in this chapter that hasn't happened in the last couple chapters where Jack and Ralph are actually getting along. And they're kind of like, oh, this is nice. We're getting along again. But then they kind of like, well, but all the other stuff in between is really getting in the way of this. So I thought that was an interesting part of this chapter. And it kind of continues in the next one as well.
Mm-hmm. I can try for a summary of chapter 7.
Yeah.
But I will admit I was not a very good student. I did not actually take notes to give my summary, so I'm just going to try and free form this. So chapter 7, Shadows and Tall Trees. If there's anything I mix, feel free to chime in. But all of the boys kind of are talking about the pig run, or it talks about the pig run. It talks about the island, and it begins with Ralph kind of realizing how filthy he's gotten, how actually like having a bath with soap and a toothbrush would come in handy at this point. And he notices that he's been kind of unconsciously chewing on his fingernails and biting them, and he's realizing he's sort of reverted to habits that he had when he was a little kid. And he's like, next I'll be sucking my thumb. And so it's describing the island, and he's kind of looking out over things, and Simon joins him. And Simon is just kind of this nice, comforting friend. And he's like, I think you'll find a way to get home. Like, you'll get back home eventually. And Ralph, instead of being like, thanks, pal, he's like, what, do you have a ship in your pocket? And he's kind of snarky and sarcastic. Yeah, jerk. And then Simon is kind of like, no, I just think we'll be back. We'll get back all right. And so they have this kind of moment of friendship and smile at each other. Let's see, what happens next?
I know this is not like the part of the program where we're talking about our favorite quotes, but right after that happens, I put this little like heart down here. It says, the ground was turned over near the pig run and there was droppings that steamed. Jack bent down to them as though he loved them, which I just thought was funny. And so I underlined it because he's like, I want to get that pig. There's that poop. I can find one.
There's that poop. That's right. Well, then they go into this pig hunting scene where...
Yeah, before that happens, there's this brief, like, dream sequence, if you will, of, like, Ralph daydreaming about being back at home and, like, the ponies and his books and his, back when his mom was still alive, right? Because his mom's dead, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
They make
when his mom was still alive and his dad was home and he wasn't sent off to boarding school, so, like, just, like, reminiscing about, as they're, like, walking through the jungle, he's able to kind of daydream about his life, so.
Yep. That part actually reminded me of some of the journal entries that have been submitted, like, kind of remembering what had happened prior to the island. And so we...
He's snapped out of it by a boar.
Snapped out of it by a boar. And Ralph kind of participates for the first time in some hunting action. And he's really psyched up and proud because he sort of wounds a boar. and he's seeking all the other boys' approval and is like, didn't you see me? Didn't you see me? I wounded it. And Jack is trying to diminish his kind of participation. He's like, well, you didn't catch it. And,
like, why did you
why
throw
didn't you
your
grab
spear?
it?
Yeah.
So Ralph is kind of deciding, hey, maybe hunting is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then it turns into like this weird murdery kind of game.
Yep.
Where they pretend that Robert is a pig, and they're at first kind of playfully poking at him, and then Robert starts saying, "Ow, stop it, you're hurting me," and then it sort of gets out of hand.
They like are holding him down, yeah. And they do the chant again. Kill the pig, cut his throat, kill the pig, bash him in.
Yes. And then leads to one of my favorite quotes when it says, he rubbed his rump ruefully.
Yeah.
And Jack is like rolling over laughing. He's like, that was a great game.
That was super fun.
That was super fun.
And Ralph thinks it's fun too. Like it says Ralph was too fighting to get near, to get a handful of that brown, vulnerable flesh. The desire to squeeze and hurt was overmastering. So Ralph is finally understanding what Jack has been kind of feeling this whole time of like, I want to kill something. This is so much fun, which is weird.
And yeah, and he kind of has that moment where he's overpowered by id, maybe, like the feeling to kill. But then he kind of snaps out of it, and he's like, well, it was just a game.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe trying to convince himself that it was just a game.
Yeah, and then they start talking about, like, Maurice is like, we have to have a drum. Like, for some reason, they need this, like, ritualistic, like, drumming and chanting, and, like, they think that'll be fun. And then there's, like, this offhand joke that Jack makes where they're like, Robert, who's now hurt, right? He's like, I didn't like that. That wasn't fun for me. He's like, you want a real pig? Still caressing his rump, because you've got to kill him. And then Jack says, use a little in. And everybody laughed. Like, it's hilarious to kill a small 5-year-old child. Like, they just, like, they make this joke, and, like, everyone thinks it's hilarious, and it's not.
Like, that's kind of creepy. So then they start talking about the beast, and, like, what if the beast is up there? And Jack says, well, then we'll kill it. And so they decide to kind of, correct me if I'm wrong with the order here, but I think they start at that point.
Yeah, they're talking about going up to the mountain. So they're like, after the boar comes, they're like, okay, we're not getting anywhere. We've stopped to like play this game. Like, come on, guys. Like, we had a plan here. And it's starting to get dark. And they're like, we have to go back up the mountain to light the fire. And they're like, we don't have the glasses. He's like, well, we'll just check. And they're like, well, some of them I think are getting scared. They're like, we should probably go back and tell Piggy what we're doing. I think it's an excuse.
I think they use it as an excuse.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, we better go tell Piggy.
Right.
And Jack is kind of blindly pressing ahead, like, oh no, like we have to go up to the top of the mountain. We don't need to go back and tell Piggy.
And Simon ends up going. They're like, well, one person can go back, and they're like by himself in the middle of the dark in the jungle. And Simon's like, I'm fine, I'll do it. So Simon goes back. We know that Simon's not afraid of the dark. But this is important that Simon's in the woods for the next chapter. So he says he'll go back. And then the rest of them kind of like press on. And
eventually everyone has kind of dropped out and has wanted to go back to Piggy when Jack kind of starts taunting Ralph and makes it so that it's really hard for Ralph to not continue on.
Right, he's like teasing him, like, you're too afraid.
There's this quote on 119, and Jack says, I'm going up to the mountain to look for the beast now. Then the supreme sting, the casual bitter word, coming. And so he's kind of taunting Ralph, like, oh, are you too afraid to come along? And so Ralph agrees to go, and eventually it ends up being just Jack, Ralph, and Roger, who go to the top of the mountain to see what's going on with the beast. Even though it's dark, they're kids, and they have only sticks. And Ralph kind of realizes how ridiculous this is. Like, even if there is a beast at the top of the mountain, what are we going to do about it? So they kind of get to the top of the mountain, and then there's another conversation between Jack and Ralph, like, well, we should continue on. And Ralph's like, well, fine, you go for it if you're not afraid. You go check and see if there's a beast. And so they all kind of crouch and crawl on their hands and knees to peek. And in the shadow of the night, they see this billowing where no rock should be. There's this billowing kind of image in the dark, and they can't really see what it is at first. And they describe what they hear as a plopping sound, which is, again, the parachute kind of catching wind and then plopping over. And let's see. Oh, yeah, Roger suggests his only word. He's like,
it's a frog.
It's a frog. Good contribution, Roger.
Mm-hmm.
And some frog. There was a noise too, kind of plop noise. And then eventually they creep far enough forward where they can kind of see that bulging shape. And in the end of the chapter, the wind kind of picks up the parachuter, and they see the parachuter's, or like kind of the outline of his face. It says the creature lifted its head, holding toward them the ruin of a face. So they don't really see what it is, but they just see that it's like a scary something.
And then they run.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, Ralph found himself taking giant strides among the ashes, heard other creatures crying out and leaping, and dared the impossible on the dark slope. Presently, the mountain was deserted, save for the 3 abandoned sticks and the thing that bowed. So they got so scared that they just dropped their sticks and ran. Like, so Ralph was right. Like, even if they did find a beast, like, what were they going to do? Like, they had sticks, so they just ran.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, now they've confirmed that there is something beast-like at the top of the mountain. They don't know what it is. They don't know if it'll follow them, but they've figured out that there is something there, and the two kind of leader characters, Ralph and Jack, will likely, if we're predicting, go back and report that to the rest of the boys.
So yeah, I mean, I think I talked about some of the quotes that I thought were good, but I think the part where, you know, Ralph is getting a taste of the violence was interesting, and then just like that conflict between Ralph and Jack, and them kind of daring each other on, right? Who's gonna be the braver one? Who's gonna actually go ahead? And you know, at one point it says, where is it? Ralph heard, it said, so this is Jack. It says, if you don't want to go on, said the voice sarcastically, I'll go up by myself. Ralph heard the mockery and hated Jack. The sting of ashes in his eyes, tiredness, fear enraged him. So yes, he's mad at Jack, but it's also like he's been walking all day. He's exhausted. He's scared. He's got ashes in his eyes. It's just like, have you ever, you know, it's like when you're just like so tired and like worn, you're just like, I can't argue right now. Like
I don't even care anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought that kind of dynamic between Ralph and Jack was interesting, and also the way they keep referring to Piggy. It's interesting because he's not even there, but he's still like a focus point of their conversation. Like, oh, well, we should go back and let Piggy know. He's kind of used as an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jack is like, oh, yeah, we can't leave Piggy wondering, can we? So then he's still used to kind of be made fun of. And
They also
a point of weakness.
They also point out, somebody, I think it's Jack, points out that, like, why are we going up to the mountain? Because we don't even have Piggy's glasses. Like, even if we get there, we can't light a fire. Like, they, you know, kind of re-acknowledge this, like, usefulness of Piggy for his glasses, for the means to, like, light the fire. So, and then I also think that this Roger, like, is interesting. He's just silent, and, like, he kind of comes along. It says, Roger, uncommunicative by nature, said nothing. He offered no opinion on the beast, nor told Ralph why he had chosen to come on this mad expedition. So, like, yeah, like Ralph's like, who are you? Why are you here? Like, why do you want to be, like, he doesn't have, they don't know his motivation for going with them. But as somebody who's read the whole book, I know a little bit more about Roger.
We might learn a little bit more about Roger as we go along.
Mm-hmm.
So that was chapter 6 and 7, and I think we've kind of gotten over a hump, if you will, no pun intended, with the mountain. But like now that they have seen this beast, things kind of progress a little bit more quickly from now moving forward.
Yeah, I think now everybody, all the boys except for Simon now are fully believe in the existence of a beast because the leaders, Ralph and Jack, have seen it.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think it's an interesting kind of turning point of now the reader knows that it doesn't really exist. So like before, maybe that wasn't clear whether it was real or not, and now I feel like it's very clear that it's not real, and so it's like switched. Like the boys, all of us were in this together, us as a reader and the boys were like, is this real? And now they think it's definitely real, and we know that it's definitely not real.